If you're just joining my series on theme, then I suggest you first look at part 1, 2, and 3 before starting this one. It will make this video easier to follow. We are now at part 4 in my series on theme. There continues to be confusion on just what theme is. Writers have their opinions on what it is, which is sometimes incorrect, but that's not the only problem. They also have a great deal of opinion on how it differs from the plot of their story. Time for another of my little tales. Twin 16-year-old girls named Trina and Tracy are brought into the operating room on the verge of death after a tragic accident. Along with a few broken bones and crushed rib cages, both girls' hearts were partially destroyed during the accident. When their mother, Melanie, received the news about her daughters, she headed to the hospital as quickly as she could. She was devastated by what had happened to her daughters. From the moment they were born, they meant everything to her. Before them, she had lost the will to live, and until the day the doctor confirmed her suspicions that she was pregnant, she had regularly contemplated suicide. And the reason Melanie was so adamant about taking her own life was because a year earlier, she had lost her own mother to cancer. Watching her mother fade away to nothing was more than Melanie could take, remembering how strong and confident she once was. But that wasn't the only thing that she had missed. It was also her mother's beautiful singing voice. She had the most angelic voice that anyone had ever heard before. Even back when Melanie was a little girl, she would sit on her mother's lap and listen to her mother sing the most beautiful songs she had ever heard. And when her mother was finally diagnosed with cancer, she promised that before she died, the last gift that she would give her was to sing a final song so she could see the smile on her face. But the type of cancer that Melanie's mother contracted was throat cancer, and which made it impossible for her to speak during her last days, much less to sing. She died shortly after, never being able to fulfill her promise. It was such a devastating ordeal for Melanie that she never wanted to feel that kind of loss ever again. So when she stood there and watched the doctors working to try to save her daughters, she felt as if the death of her mother was happening all over again. But not just because she might be losing a loved one, it was also because she believed that it wasn't a coincidence that she became pregnant soon after her mother had passed away. She was convinced that her mother was reborn in her twin daughters. And she was completely convinced of this when she discovered that they had the ability to play music like no other. They were child prodigies and could play the most angelic music anyone had ever heard. Their choice of instrument was the piano, and the way they turned those keys into music brought smiles and tears to all who heard them. They were actually returning from their biggest concert when the vehicle they were driving in went off the road and crashed down onto the adjacent underpass. As Melanie stood there crying, she listened attentively to the attending surgeon who explained that he would be able to repair all of their broken bones without a problem, but their hearts were of a grave issue. He went on to explain that the left side of Trina's heart had been damaged beyond repair, but the right side of her heart was in perfect condition. And the right side of Tracy's heart was damaged beyond repair, but the left side was in perfect condition. He also went on to explain that it would be impossible to find a matching donor at such a late hour. The only option left to save one of her daughters was by giving her the good half of the other daughter's heart, which also meant that one of her daughters would have to die. He then warned that she had to decide quickly because if he didn't perform the surgery soon, both of her daughters would die. Melanie looked down at her two daughters and told the surgeon that she had already made her decision. Today, I'll talk about how theme differs from plot, and then I'll tell you how Melanie was able to make her decision so quickly. In my last video, I talked about the differences between the theme and the subject. In this video, I will talk about the differences between the theme and the plot. And believe it or not, this comparison is a little easier to grasp. If you've been following along with my earlier videos, you might remember my video where I talked about what plot is and its importance to the creation of your novel. If you haven't yet watched that video, just think of the plot of your story as the foundation. Without it, there can be no story. There can be no characters, no setting, no conflict, no climax, and no resolution because there would be no need for them. Your plot is what your story is about. Do you remember another of my earlier videos on finding your ideal idea? That idea became your plot. Now keep in mind what we just covered regarding theme. The textbook answer is theme is the essence of a story, the abstract entity that embodies the true spirit of what the author is trying to say, while leaving behind a lesson for both the main character and the reader. If you recall, we couldn't definitively determine the theme in our bank robber story, and that's because theme usually isn't perceived until near the ending. Although it exists throughout your story, interwoven as an underlying entity, unlike plot, which must be determined from the beginning, theme need not be realized until far into your story. Where plot, quite tangible because of the characters, setting, conflict, climax, and resolution, is quite evident and is the platform from which your story is told. Theme, being abstract and a lesson learned usually by your story's conclusion, must exist like the other parts of your plot within your plot. Keeping in mind what theme is, because it's an abstract entity that exists under the surface of your story, you shouldn't try to base your story around it. Instead, have an idea about what you want it to be based on, such as love, freedom, coming of age, etc., and keep it at the back of your mind. Keeping it as just a concept throughout the main part of your story is extremely important. And the reason for this is because you should never create your story based on your theme. It constricts you, not allowing your story to develop naturally. Let's take our earlier story about Nicole, who goes into a motel room and finds her fiance dead. We'll change things up a little, and instead of finding him dead, Nicole shoots him dead. Let's also say we have a theme in mind, jealousy, because all we know for sure in the beginning is that in some sort of jealous rage, Nicole shoots her fiance after finding him in bed with another woman. We could then make our lesson to her the moral of the story: live by the sword, die by the sword, which is a lesson to her, letting her know that the way her life is lived will be the way it ends. This would mean this story would be primarily about how she lived a life of crime, killing her fiancé and maybe others, and in the end, died in a similar way. By following this theme, we have forecasted our story and limited its potential growth. But as we already know, this is not the way our story goes. Remember in my earlier video, I explained that when dealing with a crime story, there are many twists and turns that take the reader down several different tangents. In this new twist on the Nicole story, it first seemed as though she was a killer, and the message at the end of the story, live by the sword, die by the sword, might be a fitting one. But after allowing our story to unfold, we discover she isn't a killer but a victim. Much of the story is then dedicated to allowing the reader to follow her to right a wrong by making the real killer pay for killing her fiance and subsequently blaming her for it. By the time we reach the end of the multitude of twists and turns with one surprising outcome after the other, she remains victorious, and we can then see the theme of the story: revenge, a woman's scorn, betrayal, an eye for an eye, etc. And the lesson, the moral of the story might be: when you lay down with dogs, you get up with fleas, or he who plots to hurt others often hurts himself, or from the deepest desires often comes the deadliest hate. All of which could never have been realized until near the end. But like I mentioned earlier, you still need to have a concept of the theme before you begin so it can be detected under the surface of your story. Just don't allow that theme to control your creativity by depending on it to develop your plot. Here's another quick example from a story you probably read when you were a child called The Scorpion and the Frog. A scorpion asks a frog to carry him across a river. The frog hesitates, afraid of being stung, but the scorpion argues that if he did so, they would both drown. Considering this, the frog agrees, but midway across the river, the scorpion does indeed sting the frog, dooming them both. When the frog asks the scorpion why, the scorpion replies, "It's in my nature to do so." Here, the story is about the scorpion and the frog getting to the other side of the river. That's evident, it's tangible, and we can see them in their attempt to cross. What isn't so evident is the underlying message that has been apparent from the moment the story began. The theme: betrayal, deception, survival. The theme is about the nature of our characters. Although the scorpion knows that to sting the frog while on his back would mean certain death to not only the frog but also to himself, he cannot help but to betray the frog's trust because he cannot betray who he is. The frog, however, believing that out of some sort of will to survive, the scorpion would forego his natural instincts and refrain from killing him, eventually realizes that where the scorpion is concerned, what he wants is overshadowed by what he is. But although the scorpion very much wants to survive and make it to the safety of the shore on the frog's back, it's in his nature to sting the frog, killing him and bringing about his own demise. The lesson here, for the main characters and the reader, the moral of the story could be: a leopard can never change its spots. Since it's in the scorpion's nature to sting, even faced with certain death, he cannot upset the balance of nature and become that which he is not. Remember this: plot is a literary term used to describe the events that make up a story or the main part of a story. It is primarily about the journey and the plight of the main character. The experiences faced through conflict will allow the reader to conclude certain aspects of life in the form of theme. Think of the plot as the foundation. Like I've already stated, without it, there can be no story. There can be no characters, no setting, no conflict, no climax, no resolution, and there can be no theme. Because without a plot, there would be no need for any of them. They simply have no reason to exist. Look at it this way: you have a liver, two kidneys, a heart, and a brain sitting on a table in an operating room, but you have no body to put them into. As important as these vital organs might be, without a body to put them into, they are completely unimportant, totally useless. Since we know that plot is what a story is about, our roadmap that our main character follows, it allows us to follow the message that theme has provided for us because it provides the basis for theme as well as everything else that makes up our story to exist. Think of it this way. I just mentioned that plot is our roadmap. So let's pretend you are traveling along an unfamiliar road late at night with nothing but your roadmap and the corresponding road signs along the way in your attempt to arrive at a desired destination. I've mentioned this little scenario before and I'm using it again because it helps to make my point. Before we begin this little scenario, and since this is now the 21st century and no one really uses road maps anymore, we'll replace it with a GPS device. For all intents and purposes, the outcome remains the same. After typing in your destination, the GPS lays out the route and directs you onto the start of the unfamiliar road. It announces that in 7 kilometers, you will come to an intersection where you must make a right turn onto a road called Desolation. You make the turn and continue driving along a very dark and quiet road. Your car is the only one on that road, and with nothing more than your headlights to guide you, you drive at a steady 30 kilometers an hour. You remain on this road for another 11 kilometers when you are instructed by the GPS to veer to the right onto another road called Devastation. Soon after driving onto this road, you must slam on your brakes. Up ahead is a fallen tree blocking the road. After carefully driving off the road to navigate around it, you make it to the other side and continue your drive. But you soon discover that several more trees along that road have fallen, blocking your path and causing you to find an alternate way around. At the end of 4 kilometers, the GPS instructs you to make a left turn onto a road called Dilapidation. You make the turn and find that you must slow your car to no more than 20 kilometers an hour due to the uneven road filled with a vast number of potholes. You begin contemplating turning back and forgetting about your desired destination, but after losing control of your car and nearly losing your life, you find a new reason to reach your destination and continue steering your car around each pothole you come to. This stretch of road is only 1.5 kilometers long, but due to the decreased speed you must travel at to avoid damaging your car, a considerable amount of time passes before your GPS instructs you to make a right turn 600 meters ahead onto a road called Expectation. By the time you make the turn, you can see the sun beginning to rise. Although the road that you're now driving on has the odd fallen tree and deep pothole, they are few and far between. And with some light from the rising sun, you can increase your speed back up to 40 kilometers an hour. For the next 22 kilometers, you drive along with a better disposition. And for the first time since you began your journey, you feel confident. It is after turning onto a road called Enthusiasm, while the sun is high enough in the sky that you no longer require your headlights, you realize you're not only looking forward to arriving at your destination, but you are also smiling for the first time since you began your journey. The road, void of any obstacles, and as you pass the odd motorists, you improve your speed to a brisk 60 kilometers an hour as you look ahead far in the distance toward your desired destination. After 30 kilometers, the GPS instructs you to make a right turn onto the road called Euphoria. Now, the sun is high in the sky, and for the first time, you notice birds flying about. You turn onto Euphoria and find yourself sharing the road with several other motorists. Then the GPS announces you have arrived at your destination. Now, from this little story, we can realize several things. The plot being the journey, the roadmap. We understand that you are the main character as you attempt to arrive at your desired destination. The setting being where all of this takes place along a dark and deserted road. Along the way, you are met with several conflicts: the fallen trees, the uneven roads, the potholes, your strong desire to give up, all of which you overcome, which would be represented in the rising and falling action. The second plot point being the moment you lose control of your car and nearly lose your life, and the climax being the moment you make it onto Euphoria. But that's not all. Throughout your journey, there's been a theme. It might be ambition or courage or even survival. And the lesson for you, the main character, as well as the readers, might be difficult roads often lead to desired destinations, or the end justifies the means, or it's always darkest before the dawn. And there could be a slew of others. But I think you get what I mean. You can now see that by taking away plot, removing our roadmap out of this story, we have no story. All we have is a laundry list of points with no actual place for them to flourish, including no actual place for theme to exist from. It's important to understand that theme is an integral part of any story. Do all stories have a theme? Maybe not, but all literary stories must. Theme really is the difference between a story with direction and one just trying to get from start to finish. Without Dark Road Story, without the theme, what would we really have? We would have you taking a late night drive on a road you shouldn't have been on. We would come to the end of the story blaming you for being an idiot, for driving on a road only you were stupid enough to be on. But with the necessary theme, we soon realize that your story isn't really about a late night drive on a dangerous road. Instead, with the theme, we understand what your story is really about: your struggle for life, euphoria, expectation, desolation, destruction. Do you remember these names of the roads as you drove along them? You started out on the road desolation and then drove onto destruction. If you think along the lines of theme, while journeying along these roads, you're at a very low point in your life. But then, through perseverance, you ended up on better roads, expectation, and then euphoria. The theme allowed us to see that you were on the road to recovery, leaving the bad part of your life behind and heading confidently to a better life that you justly deserve because you took the time to seek it out. Like I mentioned earlier, in the beginning, you may not know in any detail exactly what your theme will be. But if you have an idea, you can follow the theme, allowing it to guide you through your story, alerting you to the times when you inadvertently veer from your intended plot so you can judge accordingly to get back on track. Remember, just before I started this series, I had given you a description of a park with people enjoying the day with friends and family. If you haven't realized it yet, the theme there is friends and family. And now I'll tell you the ending to the story I call A Promise Finally Kept. Melanie stood over her twin daughters and thought about how much they looked like her mother, believing more than ever that she was a part of them. Then she informed the surgeon that she was a match and she was giving her consent to have the right side of her heart given to Tracy and the left side of her heart to Trina. And during the operation, while the surgeon and his team prepared to remove Melanie's heart, he turned on some music, something he always did during his operations. But this time, he just happened to play a recording of the twin girls' latest concert. And as Melanie began to drift off from the anesthesia, she was finally able to smile as she listened to her daughters with the spirit of her mother one last time. Thanks for watching. If you found anything that I said beneficial to you in any way, hit that subscribe button because you never know. My next video might just be helpful too.
Light the flash, go to copy, crumbling in the heat. Bass drop, body sway, can all dance away.